The grocery store was almost empty that night. The buzzing sound of old fluorescent lights filled the silence. The clock above the counter ticked slowly, each second echoing in the quiet aisles. The shelves were stacked neatly with bread, canned food, and fresh vegetables. But the store felt lonely. It was the kind of silence that made small noises louder. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator at the back seemed like a whisper in the still air. Behind the counter stood a young man. He was tall and strong, with blonde hair and broad shoulders that stretched his sleeveless uniform. His arms showed years of hard work, but his eyes were calm and observant. He was used to long nights, ringing up groceries for tired customers who said very little before walking back into the night. But tonight felt different. Something in the air was heavier, almost waiting for something to happen. The doorbell above. The entrance chimed, breaking the silence. The cashier looked up. A woman stepped inside, holding the hand of a small girl. At first glance, they seemed like any other mother and daughter. But something about them was different. Their skin shimmered faintly under the harsh lights, carrying a soft blue glow. Their hair was silver white, catching the light as if it had a shine of its own. They moved quietly, carefully, as if they did not want to be noticed. But the cashier could not look away. The mother's face carried both beauty and sadness. She walked with slow steps, her head slightly lowered, but her eyes scanned the store quickly, as if she was always alert. The little girl, no older than 7, clung to her mother's hand. Her wide eyes looked around the store, filled with both curiosity and fear. She pressed closer to her mother's side, holding on tightly, as if the world outside was too big and too dangerous. The cashier watched them move toward the aisles. He had seen all kinds of people come and go, but never anyone like them. He felt an odd mix of curiosity and unease. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they look so different? He had no answers, but something told him their story was not ordinary. The mother picked up a small basket. She walked slowly past the shelves, choosing only a few things: a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, some vegetables, a pack of rice. Her movements were careful, almost hesitant, as if she was weighing every choice. The cashier noticed how she looked at each item for a long moment before placing it in the basket. It was not the way someone shopped for comfort. It was the way someone shopped for survival. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed toward the fruit section. Her eyes lit up at the sight of bright red apples. The mother paused. She looked at her daughter, then at the apples. For a moment, she reached out, almost ready to take them, but then her hand froze. Slowly, she pulled it back and shook her head gently. The little girl lowered her eyes, disappointment clear on her face, but she did not complain. She only held her mother's hand tighter. The cashier felt his chest tighten at the sight. He could not hear their words, but he could see their struggle. It was not the kind of struggle you saw on the surface. It was quiet, hidden, but heavy enough to be felt across the room. Finally, the mother and daughter made their way to the counter. The basket was not full. It carried only the basics, just enough to survive a few days, nothing more. The cashier stood straighter, watching carefully as she placed the items one by one on the counter. He noticed her hands. They were steady but pale, her fingers gripping each item as if letting go was painful. He began to ring up the groceries, the soft beep of the scanner filling the silence. Each sound seemed louder than usual. The mother stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the counter, avoiding his gaze. The little girl leaned against her, still holding her hand, her small eyes watching every movement with nervous curiosity. When the last item was scanned, the cashier gave the total. The words hung in the air, and in that moment, everything changed. The mother's shoulders dropped, her eyes closed for a brief second, and her lips trembled. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out a small purse. The way she held it made it clear she already knew what she would find inside. She opened it and counted the few coins with shaky fingers. It wasn't enough, not even close. Her breath caught, and she stood frozen for a moment, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. Then, with a quiet sigh, she began to reach for the groceries, her hand moving toward the bread to put it back. The cashier's heart pounded in his chest. He did not move, but his eyes stayed locked on her. The tension in the air grew heavy, pulling the audience deeper into the moment. A mystery lingered in the silence. Why was she here? Why could she not afford food? And why did her sadness feel like more than just hunger? The story had only just begun, but the mystery was already gripping, pulling everyone forward with one unspoken truth: something important was about to happen. The silence between the mother and the cashier felt endless. The sound of coins sliding back into her small purse was soft, yet it echoed across the store like a bell of defeat. Her shoulders sank as if an invisible weight had pressed down on her, and her eyes moved slowly to her daughter. The little girl looked up, her hands still locked tightly around her mother's fingers, her eyes searching for answers she could not understand. The mother took a slow breath and reached toward the counter. Her hand hovered above the loaf of bread. She was ready to return it, ready to give up the very food she had hoped would keep her daughter full for a few days. Every movement she made was heavy, as if even letting go of one item meant letting go of dignity. The cashier stood frozen. His hand gripped the edge of the counter. He was trained to stay quiet, to keep business simple. But nothing about this moment felt ordinary. He watched her trembling fingers touch the bread, watched the pain in her eyes, and something inside him stirred. He felt as though if he allowed her to return those groceries, he would become part of a world where kindness no longer existed. The mother tried to speak, her voice a whisper that almost broke apart in the air. I can't. The words carried shame, but they were also words of surrender. She pulled the bread toward her, ready to slide it back across the counter. Her daughter's eyes widened. The little girl tugged gently at her mother's dress. "Mama," she said softly, her voice innocent, her hope still alive. The single word cut through the silence like lightning. It was not a demand. It was not even a question. It was a plea. A reminder that hunger was not just a problem of today, but a shadow that would follow them tomorrow. The cashier's chest tightened. He could not look away from the child. Something about her eyes, her small voice reminded him of the fragility of life. She did not complain. She did not cry. She simply held on to her mother's hand with all the trust in the world. And in that trust, the cashier saw something greater than money. The mother finally placed the bread back on the counter. She looked away quickly, as if ashamed to meet the cashier's gaze. She reached for the vegetables next, her fingers moving slower this time. It was as if each item was not just food, but a piece of hope being stripped away. The air around them grew heavier with each movement, and the room seemed smaller, the silence thicker. The cashier leaned forward slightly, his voice breaking the silence. "Wait." The word was simple, but it carried weight. The mother froze, her hands still resting on the basket. She looked up with startled eyes, unsure if she had done something wrong. The little girl's grip on her mother's hand tightened, fear flickering across her face. The man's expression softened. "Don't put it back." The mother blinked. For a moment, she did not understand. "But I don't have her." Words faltered. She could not bring herself to finish the sentence. The cashier shook his head slowly. "Keep it. I'll take care of it." His voice was firm, not leaving space for argument, but also calm, carrying no judgment. For a long second, the mother stared at him as if she had misheard. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She could not believe what she was hearing. In her world, kindness was a rare and fragile thing, easily broken. Yet here it was, standing in front of her. The little girl's eyes lit up, though she did not say a word. She looked at the cashier with silent wonder, her small fingers pressing tighter into her mother's hand, as if urging her to accept the gift. The mother finally found her voice, though it trembled. "You don't need to." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. She had faced rejection so many times, but rarely had she faced kindness. And kindness was harder to accept because it demanded vulnerability. The cashier shook his head again. "It's fine. Everyone deserves to eat. Let me do this." The silence that followed was different this time. It was not heavy with shame, but with emotion, with disbelief, with the fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still humanity in the world. The mother lowered her eyes, hiding the tears that slipped down her cheeks. She whispered softly, "Thank you." The words were almost lost in the hum of the store's lights, but they carried the weight of someone who had not spoken gratitude in a very long time. The cashier bagged the groceries quickly, his strong hands steady as he placed each item carefully into the paper bag. He did not want her to feel like a burden. He wanted her to see this act as normal, as natural, as something anyone should do for another human being. The little girl's eyes never left him. She was too young to understand the rules of money, but she understood one thing clearly, that this man had given her and her mother something more than food. He had given them dignity. She pressed her face into her mother's side, still holding her hand, but her small smile betrayed her relief that the mother held the bag close when he handed it to her. For a brief moment, her eyes met his, and in that look was an entire story. A story of hardship, of wandering, of being different, of being unseen. And in that look was also gratitude deeper than words. The cashier did not ask questions. He did not demand answers about her strange skin or her glowing eyes. He only nodded once, silently telling her she did not need to explain. His choice had already been made. The night outside was still dark, the streets cold and quiet. But inside that small grocery store, something powerful had happened. A decision, an act of kindness. And though it looked small, it carried the weight of something far greater than anyone could see at that moment. And as the mother held her daughter's hand and prepared to leave, the air shifted. The suspense was not over. It had only just begun. The paper bag rested on the counter, filled with food that was no longer just items, but symbols of dignity and survival. The mother held it close, almost afraid it would disappear if she loosened her grip. Her daughter clung to her side, her small hand wrapped tightly around her mother's fingers. For a moment, the store was silent again, broken only by the hum of the lights and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The cashier stood behind the counter, his arms resting on the surface, his gaze steady. He did not smile, but his eyes carried warmth. He had made his choice. Rules said one thing, but his heart had said another, and once he spoke, there was no turning back. Still, inside him, tension grew. He knew what he had done could bring questions, trouble, maybe even punishment from his manager, yet none of that mattered. He could not let a mother and child walk away hungry. The woman finally found her voice. Why? The word was soft, almost trembling, as though she was afraid to break the fragile moment. The cashier shrugged lightly, his eyes never leaving hers. Because it's the right thing to do. She opened her mouth, wanting to say more, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. Gratitude and disbelief swirled inside her. She wanted to tell him about the nights she had gone without eating, so her daughter would not starve. She wanted to explain the fear of being different, of being noticed, of being judged for the glow of her skin and the color of her eyes, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. The little girl tugged at her mother's dress, her eyes shining. "Mama, we can take it?" she asked, her voice innocent and light. Breaking through the HEAVINESS. The mother knelt down to meet her daughter's gaze. She brushed a silver strand of hair away from the girl's face and nodded slowly. "Yes, we can." Her voice cracked as she spoke, but the words carried hope that had been absent for too long. The cashier watched them closely. Something inside him shifted. He had seen customers before, people angry about prices, people careless about waste, people who treated food as nothing more than convenience. But this moment was different. This family treated every item as precious, as if each piece of bread carried the weight of life itself. It made him think of his own life, of how easily he had taken small things for granted. He leaned back slightly, still studying the mother. Her blue skin glowed faintly under the lights, her silver hair falling loosely around her shoulders. There was a strength in her posture. Even as she trembled, she was more than a struggling parent. She was someone carrying secrets, burdens hidden behind her quiet eyes. The cashier wondered what her story was. Where had she come from? What kind of world had shaped her? And why, even in her suffering, did she seem like someone carrying a piece of something larger, something beyond this small store? He wanted to ask, but he stopped himself. He sensed that pushing too far might break the fragile trust that had just been created. So instead, he spoke gently. "You don't have to explain. Just take care of yourselves." The mother looked at him with wide eyes. For a second, Her lips trembled as if she might finally share the truth. But then she lowered her gaze again. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I don't need to. You and your daughter deserve kindness. That's all that matters to me." The words hung in the air, heavy yet simple. The mother's breath caught in her chest, and she held the bag tighter. For the first time in a long time, she felt something unusual: safety. Just for a moment, in this small store, she was not an outsider, not a stranger. She was simply a mother, and he was simply a man who had chosen to help. The little girl smiled at the cashier, her innocent eyes filled with silent gratitude. She did not speak, but her look said more than words could. The cashier felt it strike deep inside him, stirring emotions he had long buried. The clock ticked louder now, each sound marking the passage of a moment that felt larger than life. The mother turned slowly, preparing to leave. The bag was heavy in her arms, but her steps seemed lighter than when she had entered. The girl held her hand tightly, her small face glowing with relief. The cashier stood still, his eyes following them as they moved toward the door. His mind wrestled with thoughts. He had broken a rule, yes, but he had also seen something that shook him. That mother was not ordinary, and neither was her daughter. Something about them felt different in a way he could not name. As they reached the door, the bell chimed softly when the mother pushed it open. Cold air rushed inside, carrying with it the quiet sound of the night beyond. She paused at the doorway, her head turning slightly back toward him. For the first time, her eyes met his fully. There was no hiding now, no shame, only raw honesty. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger than before. The cashier nodded once, unable to find words. He knew this moment would stay with him. He also knew it was not the end. Something about the glow in her skin, the mystery in her silence, told him that her story was only beginning, and somehow he had just stepped into it when the door closed. Behind them, the store fell into silence again. Yet the silence was different now. It was filled with questions, with curiosity, with the pull of something larger than either of them could yet understand. The cashier stood there, staring at the door, wondering if he had just witnessed the start of something that would change his life forever. The night air outside was cold, and the mother pulled her daughter's hand closer as they stepped out of the small grocery store. The paper bag pressed against her chest, warm with the weight of food she had not expected to carry home. For a moment, she stopped just outside the door, staring into the dark street, her heart racing. Kindness still felt unreal to her. It was like a fragile dream that could vanish if she woke too quickly. Inside, the cashier remained by the counter. He should have returned to his work, but his thoughts would not let him. His eyes lingered on the closed door, replaying every detail of what had just happened. He told himself he had only given away a few items of food, but it felt far greater than that. He had stepped across a line, not just against store policy, but into something unknown. The mother walked slowly down the sidewalk, her steps uneven. Her daughter skipped beside her, still clinging tightly to her hand, her silver hair glinting under the streetlight. "Mama," the girl whispered softly. He was kind. The mother swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes," she answered. Though her voice trembled, she wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that kindness was real. But the world had taught her to be cautious too many times. Kindness had turned into something else: suspicion, rejection, or fear. Yet tonight, for the first time, a stranger had given without asking, without judging. Back inside the store, the cashier finally moved. He picked up the coins she had left on the counter and placed them gently into the register. The money was not enough to cover even half of the groceries, but he did not care. He leaned back against the wall and let out a long breath. His heart was still pounding. He felt as though he had crossed into a story bigger than his own. The sound of the doorbell suddenly echoed again. His head snapped up. For a split second, he expected to see the mother returning, maybe to say something more, but it was only another customer, an older man grabbing cigarettes. The moment was gone, but the weight of it stayed. Meanwhile, the mother and daughter turned down a quiet alleyway leading to the place they called home. It wasn't much, just a small room with cracked walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. The mother unlocked the door with shaky hands and set the bag. On the table, she pulled out the bread, the vegetables, the milk, and placed them one by one as if they were treasures. The daughter's eyes lit up at the sight of the apples her mother had almost refused to buy. The little girl grabbed one and held it in both hands, smiling as if it was the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. She did not bite into it yet. Instead, she pressed it against her cheek, closing her eyes, savoring the simple joy of having something she thought she had lost. The mother sat down heavily on the chair, burying her face in her hands. Relief washed over her, but fear crept into. She knew she had stood out in that store. Her glowing skin, her silver hair, her strange markings, they were not things she could hide forever. Every kindness she received was balanced against the risk of being discovered. And discovery had never been safe. But tonight, something was different. The cashier had not asked questions. He had not looked at her with suspicion. He had only looked at her with empathy that made him dangerous in a different way. Because kindness, she knew, had the power to bind people together. And the last thing she needed was to be bound to anyone. The daughter finally took a small bite of the apple, crunching loudly in the quiet room. The sound pulled the mother out of her thoughts. She smiled weakly at her child, brushing a hand over her hair. "Eat slowly," she whispered. "We must make it last." Back at the grocery store, the cashier locked up for the night. He walked home through the empty streets, but his mind stayed trapped in the memory of her face. The glow of her skin had not been a trick of the light. He was sure of it now. And her silence had been filled with secrets she did not share. He told himself to forget, but deep inside, he knew he would not dot as he reached his small apartment. He stopped for a moment to look up at the sky. The stars were faint through the city haze, but one light flashed brighter, almost pulsing. He shook his head, telling himself it was only a plane, but a strange unease settled in his chest. Something was moving in the world beyond his own, and somehow, he felt he had just stepped into its path. The mother sat by the window of her room, staring out into the same night sky. Her daughter was asleep beside her, curled up with the apple still clutched in her small hands. The mother's eyes lingered on the stars. She knew the truth of that pulsing light. It was not a plane. It was a sign, a reminder that no matter how far she ran, the past would always find her. Her thoughts drifted back to the cashier. She should not care about a stranger, yet his kindness weighed on her. It reminded her of what she had lost long ago, of what she had once believed about humanity. For the first time in years, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks. The world outside was dark, but inside both the store clerk's small apartment and the mother's dim room, something had changed. Two lives, once separate, had touched for a single moment of kindness. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would not be forgotten. It was the beginning of a story far greater than they could imagine. The next morning began quietly. The grocery store opened its doors as usual, but for the cashier, nothing felt the same. He moved through the motions of arranging shelves and scanning items, but his mind replayed the night before again and again. The image of the mother with blue skin and silver hair lingered in his thoughts. Her eyes carried pain, but they also carried something he could not name, something important, something that felt larger than his small life behind a counter. Customers came and went, carrying bags of food, chattering, laughing, complaining. To them, the store was ordinary, but for him, it had become the place of a mystery. He could still feel the weight of his decision. Why had he stepped in? Why couldn't he let her walk away like any other customer? The answer seemed simple because it was the right thing to do, yet deep down, he sensed there was more. Far across the town, the mother walked carefully through crowded streets. Her daughter clung to her hand as they weaved between people, their heads bowed to avoid attention. The paper bag from last night was lighter now, but the food inside had brought them relief. Even so, the mother's heart raced with unease. She knew the cashier's kindness had saved them, but it had also drawn something dangerous. Every act of compassion came with a cost. At one point, as they passed a narrow alley, the mother paused. She felt it again, that faint vibration beneath her skin, the markings on her wrist glowing ever so slightly. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, hiding the light. Her daughter noticed and whispered, "Mama, it's happening again." The mother forced a small smile. "It's nothing, little one. Just stay close." But her eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. She knew it was not nothing. The markings were a signal, a reminder of who she really was, and how far she had traveled to keep her child safe. Back at the store, the cashier was stocking apples when his phone buzzed. A message from his manager lit the screen. "Inventory check tonight. Don't forget." He sighed, shoving the phone back into his pocket. But his thoughts drifted back to the little girl reaching for apples. The way her eyes had filled with wonder before her mother pulled her hand back. He remembered how heavy that moment had felt, how something so small could carry so much meaning. He rubbed his temple, trying to focus, but suddenly he remembered something else. When the mother had reached for the groceries, he had seen her wrist. It had been faint, quick, but he could not forget the image, strange markings glowing softly beneath her skin. At the time, he thought it was a trick of the lights. But now, the more he thought about it, the more he knew it wasn't. It had been real. That night, as the store closed, he walked home slowly. The streets were quiet, the lamps casting long shadows. He tried to convince himself to let it go, to forget the woman and her child. But something inside refused. He felt connected now, tied to her story. It was a feeling he could not shake, and it both frightened and excited him. Meanwhile, the mother tucked her daughter into bed. The little girl curled up under a thin blanket. The apple from the grocery store still clutched in her small hand. The mother watched her sleep, brushing hair away from her face. For a moment, peace washed over her. Then she looked down at her wrist. The markings glowed brighter now, pulsing faintly like a warning. She covered them quickly, whispering to herself, "Not here, not yet." Her thoughts returned to the cashier. She had seen the way he looked at her, not with fear, but with understanding. That was dangerous. Kindness was rare, but curiosity was even more dangerous. If he asked questions, if he dug deeper, the truth would spill out, and the truth could destroy everything she had fought to protect. The next day, as the cashier unlocked the store, he noticed something unusual. A black car sat parked across the street, its windows dark, its engine off. No one stepped out, but he felt eyes on him. He frowned, shaking his head, and forced himself inside. Still, unease crept under his skin. Later that afternoon, the bell above the store rang. He looked up quickly, his heart jumping. It was her. The mother stepped inside again, her daughter by her side. They carried no basket this time, only quiet footsteps. She walked to the counter, her eyes meeting his for a brief second before lowering again. The cashier's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to ask how they were, but he hesitated. Something about the air around her was heavier today. She looked tense, her movements sharper. She placed a single coin on the counter. "Milk," she said softly. He nodded, retrieving the carton without a word. As he handed it to her, their hands brushed for the briefest moment, and in that instant, he felt the faint pulse of warmth beneath her skin, as if energy flowed just beneath the surface. His eyes flicked to her wrist, where the markings glowed faintly under her sleeve. She noticed his gaze and pulled her hand back quickly. Their eyes locked, and for a second, silence roared between them. He wanted to ask, but before he could speak, she whispered, "Please don't." Her words carried weight, a plea filled with both fear and warning. He nodded slowly, choosing silence once again. But inside him, curiosity burned brighter. He now knew for certain she was not like anyone else, and her story was one that could no longer stay hidden. That night, when she left the store with her daughter, the black car across the street started its engine. Its headlights flickered once before the vehicle rolled slowly after them. The cashier stood at the window, watching, unease twisting in his stomach. He did not know who was in that car, but he knew one thing clearly: the mother and child were not safe, and by helping them, neither was he. The night was colder than usual, and the streets seemed quieter than before. The mother walked quickly, holding her daughter's hand, the carton of milk tucked under her arm. Her steps were sharp, hurried, as though she felt eyes on her. She did not look back, but her body was tense, her shoulders stiff. Her daughter stumbled a little to keep up, her small legs moving faster to match her mother's pace. The sound of an engine hummed softly behind them. The black car moved slowly down the street, keeping its distance, but never disappearing. The mother knew it was there. She did not need to look. Her skin prickled with warning, and the markings on her wrist glowed faintly under her sleeve. She pulled her daughter closer, whispering, "Stay near me, don't let go." The little girl nodded, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Her silver hair glimmered faintly under the streetlight, making her stand out even more in the darkness. The mother cursed silently in her mind, wishing she could hide that glow, wishing they could simply vanish into the shadows. Back at the grocery store, the cashier sat by the window after closing. He should have gone home, but something held him there. He had seen the car. He had seen it follow the mother and her daughter. He didn't know who was inside or what they wanted, but the unease in his chest told him it wasn't good. He tapped his fingers nervously against the counter, debating with himself. He could walk away, pretend he hadn't noticed. That would be the safe choice. But then he remembered the look in her eyes, the fear mixed with gratitude, and he knew. He could in single quotes T. Meanwhile, the mother and child turned into a narrow street leading toward their small room. The car slowed at the corner, its headlights dimming, as if trying to blend into the night. The mother stopped suddenly, pressing her daughter against the wall of a building. She crouched down, looking into her daughter's wide eyes. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back. Do you understand?" The little girl's lip trembled, but she nodded. "Yes, Mama." The car's engine cut off. The sound of a door opening echoed faintly in the night air. The mother stood quickly, pulling her daughter behind her. Her wrist burned now, the markings glowing brighter. Responding to her fear, she clenched her fist, trying to cover them with her sleeve, but the light was strong, seeping through the fabric. Two figures stepped out of the car, tall, dressed in dark coats, their faces shadowed. Their steps were slow, deliberate. As they moved closer, one of them spoke, his voice calm but cold. "You shouldn't be here." The mother's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back. Her daughter pressed tightly against her leg. "Leave us alone," she said softly, but her voice carried steel. The second man chuckled, low and cruel. "You thought you could hide, that no one would notice? You glow like a star in the dark. Did you really think humanity wouldn't see?" The little girl whimpered, burying her face into her mother's dress. The mother wrapped an arm around her, her eyes locked on the two figures. Her mind raced. She could not fight them. She could not risk exposing more than she already had. But she could not let them take her child before the men could step closer. Another sound broke the tension, the sharp footsteps of someone running. The cashier appeared at the end of the street, breathless but determined. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't have a plan, but instinct had carried him there. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. The two men turned, surprised by the interruption. The cashier's chest heaved as he glared at them, though his hands shook slightly at his sides. He had no weapon, no strength to match them, but his presence alone shifted the moment. The mother's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected him to come. She hadn't wanted him to. Yet here he was, standing between danger and safety without even knowing what he faced. One of the men sneered. "Go home, boy, this isn't your concern." The cashier didn't move. "She's with me," he said firmly. Though the words burned with risk, the mother gasped softly, her heart pounding. She knew what he had just done. By claiming her, he had tied himself to her fate, and her fate was dangerous. The men exchanged looks. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the first man smirked. "If she's with you, then you've already chosen the wrong side." They turned back toward the car, their footsteps echoing. One of them glanced back, his voice a warning. "Enjoy your kindness while it lasts. It won't save you." Then they climbed into the vehicle, the engine roaring back to life before the car rolled slowly away. The street was silent again, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down hard. The mother stood frozen, her daughter clinging tightly to her. The cashier walked toward them, his breathing still heavy. He stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. The mother's eyes were wide, filled with anger and fear. "Why did you Come, she asked sharply. Daddy hesitated, then answered simply, because you needed someone. Her expression softened for just a second before hardening again. She shook her head, whispering, "You don't understand what you've done." But even as she said the words, something in her chest shifted. For the first time in years, she was not completely alone. Someone had stepped into her fight, even without knowing the truth. And that truth was drawing closer every day. The street was quiet again after the black car disappeared. But the silence felt heavier than before. The mother stood frozen, her daughter pressed tightly against her leg, her arms wrapped protectively around her. Her eyes remained on the corner, where the car had gone, her breath sharp and uneven. She knew this was not the end. The men had seen her. They would return. The cashier stopped only a few steps away. His chest rose and fell as he tried to catch his breath. He had no plan, no idea what he had just stepped into, but he couldn't walk away. His voice was unsteady when he finally spoke. Are you both okay?" The mother turned her gaze toward him. Her glowing eyes reflected the dim light, filled with both anger and something else. "Fear. You shouldn't have followed," she said in a low voice. "You needed help." He replied firmly, "They were following you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't understand. By standing here, by speaking for me, you've already made yourself a target." The cashier shook his head. "I don't care about that. I couldn't. Just stay behind the counter and watch." The daughter peeked out from behind her mother's dress, her small eyes looking up at the man with silent wonder. She didn't understand the danger. Not fully, but she felt something different in him. Safe, trustworthy. She whispered softly, "Mama, he helped us again." The mother closed her eyes briefly, torn between gratitude and fear. When she looked back at the cashier, her voice softened, though it still carried warning. "You don't know who they are. You don't know who I am. Then tell me," he said quietly. Stepping closer, his eyes held no judgment, only steady curiosity. "You don't have to carry it all alone." She hesitated. The glow on her wrist pulsed again, faint but visible through the thin fabric of her sleeve. She pulled it tighter around her arm, but she knew he had already noticed. He had seen more than she wanted anyone to see. The daughter looked up at her mother and whispered, "You can trust him." The simple words, innocent and pure, pierced through the wall she had built for so long. The mother let out a shaky breath. "It isn't safe," she said, her voice almost breaking. "But maybe you deserve to know." She glanced around the empty street, making sure no one else was near. Then she leaned closer. "We're not from here." The cashier frowned slightly. "Not from this town." Her eyes met his, glowing faintly brighter. "Not from this world." For a moment, he could not breathe. The words hung in the air, almost impossible to believe, yet everything he had seen, her skin, her hair, her markings suddenly made sense. His mind raced, trying to grasp the meaning. She pulled her daughter closer, her voice trembling. "We came here to hide, to survive. They followed us. And now, because of tonight, they know where we are." The cashier stared at her, his thoughts a storm. He had lived his whole life in the ordinary rhythm of shelves and receipts, but now he was standing in the middle of something extraordinary. He didn't know if he should feel fear, awe, or responsibility. Yet one thing was clear: he couldn't walk away anymore. The daughter's hand slipped into his for a moment, small and warm. Her innocent eyes searched his face as if asking silently whether he would abandon them, like so many others had. He squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. The mother's breath caught. She wanted to tell him, to leave, to save himself, but the words refused to come. Instead, her chest ached with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Dangerous hope. A distant rumble in the sky broke the moment. The three of them looked up. Through the thin clouds, lights flickered too sharp, too deliberate to be stars. They moved in formation, sliding slowly across the night sky. The mother's heart sank. "They're here already," she whispered. The cashier's eyes widened. "Who?" Her answer was barely audible. "The ones who want to take us back." The little girl pressed closer to her mother, fear flashing in her eyes. The cashier stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between them and the sky as if his body could shield them from the unknown. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "Then we'll face it together." The mother looked at him, stunned. She had lived in hiding for so long, running, always alone. But now, this ordinary man, a cashier with nothing but his stubborn kindness, had stepped into her impossible world. The lights in the sky grew brighter, and the hum of engines drifted through the air. The night no longer belonged to silence, it belonged to the beginning of something far larger. The mother gripped her daughter's hand tightly, her other hand clutching the bag of milk as if clinging to normal life one last time. The cashier clenched his fists, his jaw set. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one truth: his life had changed forever. And as the shadows of the unknown descended from the sky, their story was only just beginning.